is proclaimed, we may hear with joy what you have to say to us today. I invite you here to the Word of God as it comes from Matthew today. When the Pharisees heard that Jesus had silenced the sadness, they gathered together, and one of them, a lawyer, asked Jesus a question to test him. "Teacher, which commandment in the law is the greatest?" Jesus said to him, "You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your mind. This is the greatest and first commandment, and a second is like it. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. On these two commandments hang all the laws and of the prophets."
And from Exodus, starting with chapter 19, the first 6 verses. On the third new moon, after the Israelites had gone out of the land of Egypt, on that very day, they came into the wilderness of Sinai. They had journeyed from Rephidim, entered the wilderness of Sinai, and camped in the wilderness. Israel camped there in front of the mountain. Then Moses went up to God. The Lord called to him from the mountain, saying, "Thus you shall say to the house of Jacob and tell the Israelites, you have seen what I did to the Egyptians and how I bore you on eagle's wings and brought you to myself. Now, therefore, if you obey my voice and keep my covenant, you shall be my treasured possession out of all the peoples. Indeed, the whole earth is mine, but you shall be for me a priestly kingdom and a holy nation. These are the words that you should speak to the Israelites." Then God spoke all these words. "I am the Lord your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of slavery." Well, if everything goes according to plan, meaning that weather and mechanics cooperate, our daughter Laura will land at O'Hare Airport in 27 hours and 25 minutes. If you are inclined to pray, please add United Airlines Flight 986 to your prayers. You may recall that my 20-year-old baby left on January 1st to study in France for the semester. Classes ended in mid-May, and poor child, for the past 3 weeks, she has had to spend it traveling the Mediterranean. And then back to Paris this weekend for one final elevator trip up the Eiffel Tower and a few more exquisite French pastries she's been sending me pictures of. You would think, with all of the big and little acts of letting go that parenthood has required of me the last couple of decades, from leaving her with a babysitter for the first time to dropping her off on day 1 of preschool and then kindergarten and then first grade and then all the way to college, you would think, wouldn't you, that I would have conquered the instincts of worry and fear and the urge to instruct. You would think that I might have quietly released her from my embrace at the airport 6 months ago without a slew of well-meaning reminders about how much I love her and what we expect from her. And you would think, wouldn't you, that I wouldn't have batted an eye as I watched my mostly grown little girl board the aluminum tube that would hurl her 4,100 miles across the Atlantic by herself with my credit card. You would think, but if you did, you'd be wrong. Love and limits are what parenthood is all about, if you have to boil it down, especially when our children are little, but maybe more especially when they are not. Ideally, when we make a family that includes them, we create a structure that gives our children the best shot at a healthy and responsible life, with a foundation of love and grace and faith that we promise to uphold on their behalf, with a web of relationships and support that we nurture on their behalf, with a narrative we tell them over and over again about who they are and how they came to be and who they come from, and with a complicated series of expectations that we adjust and adapt as they grow and develop. You've probably heard that sappy saying, there are two lasting things we give our children, roots and wings. Well, sometimes the truth is in the sappy. At pivotal moments, like when we have to let go at the preschool door or at the airport gate, when their wings are ready to launch them, some of us parent types feel the need to stop time and bless them one more time with a quick reminder of their roots. We assure them of our confidence in them and of the steadfastness of the lifelong promise we have made that our love and our limits will be with them wherever they go. We do it for their sake, of course, but we do it for ours too, because they are precious to us. The book of Exodus is the story of roots and wings, of love and limits, of relationships and promises. It starts, of course, with God, as all good Bible stories do, the God who began making and honoring promises all the way back in Genesis. To Abraham and Sarah, the long-suffering, childless couple, God promises countless descendants. I will make of you a great nation, and I will bless you and make your name great so that you will be a blessing. And to that promise, God adds, your offspring shall be aliens in a land that is not theirs, and they shall be slaves there, and they shall be oppressed for 400 years, but I will bring judgment on the nation that they serve, and afterward they shall come out with great possession. Similarly, to Abraham's son Isaac, God says, I will make your offspring as numerous as the stars of heaven, and will give to your offspring all these lands, and all the nations of the earth shall gain blessing for themselves through your offspring. God continually blesses this sprawling family with this three-pronged promise of too many descendants to count, a special relationship with God, and a land of their very own. God does the heavy lifting early on, requiring little from his covenant partners. The relationships are just all grace. The next person in the genealogy is Jacob. You might remember that God leads him and his family to Egypt, promising that God will be with them in that foreign land and will make of them a great nation there. And so Jacob and his sons are fruitful and multiply and settle in under the rule of a benevolent Pharaoh. But a new king takes the throne after Jacob and his sons die off, and he is less than hospitable to the Israelites. He uses scare tactics among his own people to promote fear of the immigrants and to encourage their oppression. And it doesn't take long before all of the Egyptians grow to hate the Israelites and gladly exploit them any way possible, with the full endorsement of the king. And when that mistreatment becomes normalized, the Pharaoh enacts a policy of ethnic cleansing, demanding that Hebrew midwives kill off all of the Hebrew baby boys. But because those midwives fear God's anger more than they fear Pharaoh's anger, they resist. And so the Pharaoh instructs his own people to drown every newborn Hebrew boy. The baby Moses escapes that fate when his mother places him in a basket among the reeds in the Nile. You remember the story. And the daughter of Pharaoh finds him and picks him out and raises him as her own. And although Moses grows up in the lap of luxury, he has empathy for his people. And so when he sees an Egyptian beating a Hebrew, he kills the Egyptian, which puts him on Pharaoh's 10 most wanted poster in the post office. He escapes to Midian, where he marries and has a son of his own and attempts to move on with his life. But his people remain enslaved in Egypt. And in Exodus 2, we read, "The Israelites groaned under their slavery and cried out. Out of the slavery, their cry for help rose up to God. God heard their groaning, and God remembered his covenant with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. God looked upon the Israelites, and God took notice of them." And God takes notice of Moses too, calling him from that burning bush into service to free his enslaved kin. And it takes no small amount of persuasion for the resistant Moses to agree. But eventually he returns to Egypt, where he is joined by his biological brother Aaron, and together they and the Lord enter into intense negotiations with the Pharaoh to let the Israelites go. In Exodus 6, God says to Moses, "I also established my covenant with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob to give them the land of Canaan, the land in which they resided as aliens. I have also heard the groaning of the Israelites, whom the Egyptians are holding as slaves, and I have remembered my covenant. I will redeem you with an outstretched arm and with mighty acts of judgment. I will take you as my people, and I will be your God." 10 plagues and a Passover later, the Egyptians are begging the Israelites to leave. And although Pharaoh and his military give chase, God protects the Israelites with pillars of clouds and fire and parted seas, making good on the promise to bring them out of slavery, to provide for them in the wilderness, and to lead them to the land of milk and honey that will be theirs. And I retell you this kind of long story because this history is fundamental to the Israelites once they get to the wilderness, because it's there that God demands of them a new thing. God goes like this to Moses, calls him up the mountain for a little divine dictation on a tablet. And there, for the first time, God articulates a substantive requirement from his covenant partners. As you will hear over the next couple of weeks in the study of the 10 Commandments and here in worship, the essence of the 10 Commandments is that the Israelites will commit to absolute loyalty and faithfulness to God, 1, and 2, they will embrace a new level of obligation to one another. The people God has chosen, the people to whom God has made and kept promises, will now have promises of their own to keep. But here are a couple keys to remember as you consider the 10 Commandments. God does not make a claim on the behavior of the Israelites until God has already established the relationship, and the law comes out of the relationship. God doesn't give them the law as a means of salvation. God has already saved the Israelites. And God does not give them the law to make them better, to perfect them in some way. Because the truth is, the law isn't about them individually. Like, it's not about you, and it's not about you, and it's not about you. The law is about our neighbors. God does not give them the law as a power play or as a means to enslave them with a list of do's and don'ts. These are a people God has just freed from slavery. The law is intended to perpetuate that freedom, to enable all of them to live freely in community. There is no coercion, God does not force Israelites into obedience or good behavior. God, the model of promise-making and promise-keeping, invites them into covenant life where both grace and law will provide the Israelites with their best shot at a healthy and responsible life together. They are free to respond or not. To quote from preacher and teacher Barbara Brown Taylor, "The covenant with Moses is no sudden imposition of conditions on God's love. It is a natural extension of that love, the careful description of a way of life that will protect the people so that they might live to enjoy the promise." Like any parent trying to teach his or her own child the best way to live, God beckons them to grow, to respond, and to expect more than just always being on the receiving end of the promises. Thanks be to God.